Please welcome to the stage, co-founder of diabetes.co.uk, Charlotte Summers.
Good afternoon and welcome back to HealthComp, the place where science, technology and medicine collide. My name is Charlotte Summers and I am COO and co-founder of Diabetes Digital Media. DDM create a number of digital health interventions and solutions, including the diabetes.co.uk forum and the low carb program. We have over 1.2 million members across all of our platforms, and we really apply behavior change psychology and artificial intelligence to create digital health solutions that are empowering to patients globally. They are facilitating not only long-term health behavior change, but also sustainable health outcomes. The data that we are collecting is going to demonstrate that type 2 diabetes, a metabolic condition that was once believed to be chronic and progressive, is actually, there's a lot that people can do to put their type 2 diabetes into remission with the power and the tools of big data and digital health solutions. The Low Carb program is a structured 12-week digital health program that talks people through ways that they can reduce their overall sugar consumption, and it's primarily aimed at people with type 2 diabetes. Our peer-reviewed published outcomes are going to demonstrate that after just 1 year of being on the Low Carb program, people on average lose 7.3 kilos, and they reduce their HbA1c, which is their 90-day average blood glucose reading, by 1.2%. And just to put that into perspective, the cost of diabetes is over $1 trillion globally. And what we're doing with reducing HbA1c by just that small margin, you can actually go to reduce your risk of any adverse outcomes and complications that are related to type 2 diabetes by over 20%. That also means your risk of amputation is reduced by 43% and your risk of heart problems by around 20%. And this is all from an app. The world is changing and your watch no longer just tells you the time. Traditional healthcare is being augmented by IoT devices, by digital health solutions, and they're being made available whenever and wherever. And what is the impact of this for a global proportion? People with type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, obesity that are very much linked to all of the chronic health conditions that we're seeing develop in the developed world. So Alzheimer's, heart health, and different things like this are all being reduced as a result of digital health interventions. On that basis, it's not just type 2 diabetes as an example of this epidemic. In the UK, people spend on average just 3 hours with their doctors each year. And so you can see the necessity to have other health interventions that really enable people to get access to structured education and solutions that mean they're empowered to actually make changes to their diet and their health. That's absolutely why I'm honoured to be presenting this afternoon's sessions. We have so many inspiring minds and people that I'm so excited to hear from. So, so many of you, I think, have also been with us for this morning's session. And in that program, we put smart surgery under the knife. We talked about a future filled with designer humans, and that was just a taster. So there's plenty more to come this afternoon. We have a study of sleep tech. We have an interview with the CDO of one of pharma's biggest organizations. First, though, we're going to be talking about cannabis. It's been an unforgettable year when it comes to cannabis and Canada. And twice so for Tilray, the industry doyen. Behind the headlines and the stock prices, there is a company which still has eyes firmly on the patient health prize. Outlining his views on where to go next for medicinal marijuana, the legalization and recreational use. I'm really excited. I'm conscious I've taken up less time than I was going to, and I don't want to be babbling on. So I'm going to see. I don't think they're quite ready for us. I can tell you some more about diabetes digital media, but I think we've got some really exciting speakers. So I'm just going to see if they're ready. Thank you. So here to talk about his organisation with recreational use, please welcome in conversation with Vice's Anne Gaviola, the CEO of Tilray, Brendan Kennedy.
Look at this, such a nice packed crowd here to listen to our every word. So I would love for you to tell our audience just a little bit more about the company so that they understand who it is that I'm having a little dialogue here with. Tell us about Tilray.
Sounds great. 5 years ago in Canada, we founded a company called Tilray to invest in the emerging medical cannabis market globally. Canada was the first G7 nation to legalize medical cannabis, and today there are about 35 countries internationally that have legalized medical cannabis. And so initially we built the company for Canada, but today we export to 11 other countries on 5 continents around the world. And our products in other countries, everywhere outside of Canada, are available either in pharmacies or in hospitals.
Right. So a little bit of history for people who don't know this. Your company was one of the first to get their license in Canada. You were one of the last to list, to go public. You sort of bucked the trend. How important is it to be strategic about what you guys do, even if it means you're going against what all the rest of the crowd is doing?
For us, so we were one of the first to be licensed to cultivate, process, produce medical cannabis products in Canada, and one of the first, or one of the last of that original, I guess, 20 company list, one of the last to go public. We decided to wait and list in the U.S. Because we thought there was pent-up demand from U.S. investors to invest in this industry.
Turns out you were right. So the Canada legalized marijuana at the sort of recreational level federally October 17th, and I know that, I mean, it didn't impact your company as much as others, but in terms of the cultural shift, how significant is that?
I think, so Canada became the second nation in the world to legalize cannabis for adult use. First was Uruguay, second was Canada, and just as, I travel around the world and I meet with governments in Australia, in Germany, in the UK, and we've had lots of delegations from different ministries of health around the world that have flown to Canada to see our facility. And that's generally a requirement before we export to other countries. And so countries around the world at least look at Canada's regulatory framework as a foundation for them to build their own regulatory framework. And our hope potentially is that just as countries have used Canada's medical program as a framework, they may use Canada's adult use framework in other countries around the world.
So we could be a kind of a template. Your stock popped recently after the midterm elections, and I would love for you to explain to us why that happened. Connect the dots.
So in the election on Tuesday in the US, there were a couple of different things that happened. One is 2 additional states, 2 very conservative states, Utah and Missouri, legalized medical cannabis, which brings us to now 33 states that have legalized medical cannabis. And then 1 state, Michigan, legalized for adult use. And that was received positively. Which brings us to 10 states. That was received positively by the market. There were 2 other things that happened in the US on Tuesday. One, there was a really sort of unnoticed House race in the Texas 32nd, where a congressman named Pete Sessions lost to Colin Allred. And Pete Sessions in Congress on the House Rules Committee really blocked a lot of medical cannabis legalization measures from going onto the House, Congressional House floor for a vote. And that has blocked medical cannabis legalization efforts in the US historically. And it was sort of a double Sessions day yesterday, right, in that Attorney General Jeff Sessions resigned, and that also was received. He is a drug war dinosaur, has prevented medical cannabis measures from passing in the US, and has in the past promised to go after companies that operate in the US. And so those two things, in addition to the election, were well received by medical cannabis investors.
Give us a sense of what are your top 3 favorite products that Tilray does?
Top.
Arms crossed.
You know, we signed a number of contracts in Australia where different governments in Australia purchase an oil from us that they distribute through hospitals, primarily to children with epilepsy. And I've received notes from doctors at that hospital, mothers of children with epilepsy, that are extremely powerful notes and really motivate me to continue to press other governments around the world to legalize medical cannabis. Also in Australia, we're participating in a clinical trial around chemotherapy-induced nausea. It's a phase 2 and a phase 3 clinical trial. It's done in partnership with the government of New South Wales, University of Sydney, and a very large cancer hospital in Australia. And then the third project, we actually did a phase 1 clinical trial with sick kids. Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children. Everyone calls it Sick Kids. Yeah. You're from Canada.
Absolutely.
And so Sick Kids Hospital, that was a clinical trial, 20 patients that used a formulation, an oil, 1 part THC to 20 parts CBD. And that trial, the first phase went very positively, and we'll continue that into other phases. So I guess those would be a few of my favorites.
All right. I want you to tell us a little bit more about the disruptive potential that the cannabis industry poses in terms of changing people's approach to traditional pharmaceutical products.
So in Canada, a division of Novartis called Sandoz approached us, gosh, maybe 2 years ago. They were doing due diligence on the cannabis industry, and they were concerned that patients in Canada were using medical cannabis products as a substitute for prescription painkillers, primarily opioids. And we announced an agreement about a year ago to co-brand, co-market. We're doing some R&D together just in Canada today. And so our non-combustible oils, capsules, gel caps, all those products now are branded both with Tilray and Sandoz Novartis. And we're seeing other pharmaceutical companies try and figure out how they're going to react to the cannabis industry, because there's lots of research in Canada and other countries around the world around patients sort of medicating with medical cannabis products instead of prescription pharmaceuticals. And so, and we're also seeing investors in those pharmaceutical companies try to hedge that investment by investing in the medical cannabis industry. And so I expect other pharmaceutical companies to do something similar to what the Sandoz division of Novartis has done. And we expect to take that agreement to other countries around the world.
Now, speaking of other countries around the world, you and I are talking here at Web Summit It's being held in Portugal and Lisbon, and Tilray's doing some interesting things in this country as well in terms of being able to access the European market, right?
That's right. So today from Canada, we export to Germany, the Czech Republic, Croatia, Cyprus, the UK, and are continuing to add additional EU countries. But about, I guess, 3 years ago, we started to realize that we needed a production facility outside of Canada, and really looked in the southern European countries because of weather and sunlight. Looked at Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece, and through a number of conversations with the government officials here in Portugal, Infarmed, which is sort of the health agency, ASEP, which is the investment agency, and CCAD, which is the drug agency, decided to sign an MOU with the Portuguese government to invest heavily in Portugal. And so 2 hours north of here, in a biotech facility, a biotech campus called BioCant, we have a cultivation, processing, manufacturing, distribution facility in progress. So it's about 20 million euro investment, and it's outdoor greenhouse and indoor cultivation, and then processing of finished medical products so that we can export from Portugal to other countries in the EU, primarily Germany.
Okay, I'm going to get to some of the questions here in just a moment, but because we are at HealthConf, I would like to ask you a little bit about your sort of personal health regime. You've done a few Ironman trials, have you not?
Yes, I have. I've done 6 Ironman triathlons, which in many ways prepared me for the last 8 years, just how difficult this job is and how difficult it is trying to change cultural paradigms around the world and begin to encourage governments to accept the legalization of medical cannabis.
So you talked about changing some of those paradigms. One of the questions is, what is the health benefit and how is it different than a coffee shop in Amsterdam?
Sure, so in a coffee shop in Amsterdam, people are consuming an untested, unregulated product. Every product we produce is produced in a GMP facility. It's tested for mold, mildew, fungus, pesticides, heavy metals, and we maintain stability data on that product. Everywhere outside of Canada, our products are distributed via pharmacies. So doctor writes a prescription, patient takes the prescription, goes into a pharmacy, and the pharmacist distributes the product. And in some countries, such as Germany, the insurance companies, about 90% of our products in Germany are covered by the state insurance agency. And so that's the main difference between our products and something that's found in a coffee shop. And there's consistent dosing information, so people know exactly what they're getting when they're consuming a capsule or drops of oil, compared to a lot of unknowns in a coffee shop.
That leads into the second one. Does the THC and CBD have to be extracted from the plant, or is it possible to synthesize these compounds?
So today, all of our products are made of THC and CBD that are extracted from plant materials. So they're naturally occurring products. Some of our products, some of the clinical products are, we purify the THC and CBD and then reformulate based on very specific ratios that we're producing for that drug, and in very different ratios. Synthesize, so there's 2 different types of synthesizing. One would be sort of chemicals, chemically synthesized drugs, and some of the illegal cannabis products like spice are created using that methodology. We don't do any of that. There are some drug companies that do that. And then on the other hand, biosynthesis is really interesting. And those products are usually produced really one of three ways, either through yeast or through E. coli or through a microalgae. And there is some potential that products from one of those three will be able to be produced at scale. It's something we look at a lot from an investment perspective, and potentially at some point in the future, medical products could be produced from one of those three methodologies.
So one question that we have is, how can I convince my mom and grandma that cannabis can be good if all their life thought of it as a dangerous drug?
That's,
do you have these conversations with your family?
I had those conversations with my parents when I told them I was quitting my job to do this. You know, it's interesting. One of the things that we've seen, we see it in Canada. Whenever legalization occurs, actually once this product is legalized, one of the fastest groups to begin research and begin buying the product, either medically or for adult use, are generally people over 65, and they're looking at using cannabis for pain treatment. They're looking for something that helps them go to sleep, right? A lot of the feedback we get from really female patients over the age of 65 is they're looking for something that gives them a restful night of sleep. And lots of doctors in Canada prescribe medical cannabis for that. And so once it's legal, they're actually a patient segment that's fairly easy to convince, especially if their doctor writes the prescription.
What do you think is the biggest myth that exists surrounding the cannabis industry? What do you come up against all the time, and you think to yourself, why do people still think this?
Gosh, I don't know, there's lots of myths. I mean, when I first started looking at this industry, I spent a year going around the world, going to California and Colorado, driving up dirt roads to Barnes in British Columbia, the Blue Mountains in Jamaica, 8 different licensed producers in Israel, from the Sea of Galilee down to Gaza, at coffee shops in Amsterdam, and really the whole industry was full of mythology, and a lot of the last 8 years we've spent trying to prove which myths were true and which ones were false. And initially, the biggest myths were that some grower somewhere in the world was the best grower of cannabis. I've met the best cannabis grower in the world 1,000 times, but they all think they're the best. The second myth would be that everyone thinks they have some magical genetics, some magical cultivar that's better than any other cultivar. And I grew up in California and grew up around a lot of strawberry farmers and wine growers, and I never met anyone who claimed to be the best strawberry farmer in the world, but I've met the best cannabis grower 1,000 times.
That's quite the prize. Is medical cannabis prescribed in its raw form? That is a question from the audience.
In some countries it is. So in Germany it's prescribed in whole flower. In Australia it is. In Canada it is. In Canada they also sell some milled flower products you don't really see in most other countries. And it can come as a capsule, a gel cap, a spray, an oil, a patch, CBD and THC patch products are other form factors.
There are people who say this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the types of cannabis products that may be available in the future. We're talking about edibles, the beverage potential. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I think that the way, whenever people think about cannabis, they think about, sometimes they think about ubiquitous stereotypes, and that's not really what the future looks like. That's not really what our products look like. And so you will see beverages or, oral slips like a Listerine slip, vape oil cartridges, gel caps, sprays, topicals, and you see that today. But I think that the way cannabis is consumed 5 years from now, 10 years from now, certainly medically will be very different from the way it is consumed today.
So is there a big potential to disrupt the alcohol industry, for example, as well? Even the soda industry?
Definitely. You know, people sometimes ask me about how do I feel about being in the cannabis industry, in the medical cannabis industry. I think that cannabis will disrupt alcohol. It will disrupt soda. I think you will see CBD beverages distributed and sold by soda companies. I think you'll see THC products sold by alcohol companies, and those alcohol companies are terrified of consumers substituting cannabis products for their alcoholic beverages.
Okay, and what kind of partnership would make sense for Tilray going forward?
So we have announced a partnership with Sandoz Novartis in Canada. We will extend that to other areas of the world, other geographical locations. There are lots of alcohol companies that have made some investments in the industry. Constellation Brands has invested about $5 billion US. Molson Coors. And so I expect to see other alcohol companies make investments, other beverage companies, whether it's Coca-Cola or Pepsi or CPG companies like Nestle or Unilever or P&G, and then probably see some tobacco companies as well.
So even some potential there. Are there any research results about the long-term impact of cannabis on the brain? And we have just a few seconds left.
There's a lot of research available on patients in Canada. There's a lot of research available on patients in other locations around the world. There's lots of interesting research being conducted on by neurologists around epilepsy, around Alzheimer's, around autism, and how cannabinoids interact with cannabinoid receptors in people's brains.
So people can Google it. Thank you very much. We've run out of time. This is fascinating.
Thanks so much. Thank you.